Welcome to Array Cafe, brought to you by IEEE Sensors Council. Join us for an exciting journey into the world of sensors technologies and how it is becoming better and better day by day. Our podcast takes you through the stories of scientists, engineers, practitioners, and developers who are leading the way in improving sensors in order to responding to the societal challenges. Come along as we explore how these devices are making use of these smart sensors and how they change the way we use technology every day. From getting inspired to understanding to testing and using them, we'll show you all the steps. This is RA Cafe, brought to you by IEEE Sensors Council. And here is your host, Hamida.
Hello and welcome to RA Cafe. Our guest today is Dr. Bérengère Lebental. She is a renowned researcher in the field of nanosensors and advanced technologies. Since 2018, she has been a co-founder and scientific advisor at Altrod, a company specializing in traceability solutions in the construction industry. She is a researcher at University Gustave Eiffel in Paris, France, where she led several major research projects related to sensors and sustainable development. For instance, smart city challenges or on water quality monitoring. Her expertise extends to coordinating international research projects, managing scientific networks, and teaching material science and nanotechnologies. Hello and welcome to RA Cafe, Bérengère.
Hello, Hamida. I'm very pleased to be here and to share about my research work. Thank you again, Hamida, for inviting me here.
Let's start this podcast. So, Bérengère, could you tell us about your journey from your education at École Polytechnique to becoming a co-founder of several companies like Altrod and Hallil?
So that's a long story. I'm going to try and make it short. So at École Polytechnique, École Polytechnique is a school that wants to train interdisciplinary engineers. So you can learn a lot of things from math to biology. So I actually trained in biology and chemistry, but my major was physics. And I wanted to work on nanosciences. I love the field of nano for a while now. And at the same time, École Polytechnique is training civil servants. So a lot of students at École Polytechnique are expected to go into civil service. It can be in research or in the administration. And I wanted to stay in research. So I decided to go in as a public servant in a field that's for sustainable development in very, very short. So basically, I had to find a solution to do nanosciences and contribute to sustainable development. And this was at the time where people in the field of civil engineering were starting to think, yes, what can nanoscience do for civil engineering? And I decided to do a PhD on how to use carbon nanotubes for concrete materials, using sensor based on carbon nanotubes to monitor concrete. And actually, that was at the time a very new research topic. And to do that, I had to collaborate with the CEA in Grenoble, the CEA-LETI, which is a highly renowned institute for microelectronics and nanosciences. And on the other end, I worked at University Gustave Eiffel, which at the time had another name because my institute changed name a lot of times since then. It's a long story short. To do that, I had to do 2 master's degrees. So one in applied physics, one in theoretical physics, which was condensed matter physics, actually. Then I did my PhD at University Gustave Eiffel and CEA. And then I was recruited as a full-time researcher at University Gustave Eiffel. At this point, one problem is that to do nanoscience, you need facility to do nanoscience. So you have to have this facility. And this was not the core business of University Gustave Eiffel, to have nano facility. They didn't have facility. So I've always had to collaborate. So for 10 years after I got recruited, I worked at École Polytechnique and CNRS in a lab called LPICM as contributing part-time there to develop nanosensors that would be tested at University Gustave Eiffel for applications. And then a couple of years back, now I've been working with another lab in Paris, University Paris City, ITODIS lab. focusing more on printed electronics, flexible printed electronics, and biosciences, health sensor for health applications. So all over my curriculum, I've been really focused on bringing sensor to real life application. I think I've said this sentence 1,000 times in my career, bringing nanosensor to real life application. And the solution for that in my field is that you need to create startup. There's not many solutions. To advance the maturity of your technology, you have to push for startups. And so I was involved first in the startup Alta Road, which is still live and going strong. And this startup promoted a lot of my work on concrete material and civil engineering. And presently, I'm working on a second startup, which is a hydroscope that is pushing to the market water quality sensors. So that's it for the curriculum. Sorry for being a bit long.
That's such a wonderful journey, Bérengère. What inspired you to specialize in nanosensors for smart, sustainable development? And how do you see this field evolving in the future?
So as I mentioned before, I really want what I do to have a use. As a civil servant, I'm paid by taxpayer money, and I want my work to be useful to society. And for the last 15 years, we've been at a point where sustainability is becoming a major challenge. So it was natural that nanosensor would contribute to that. I would find a use of nanosensor for sustainable development. One thing that's important is that it's easy, quote unquote, to make nanosensors in the lab. So it's easy to make a nanosensor and prove that it's sensitive to something. Making the sensor work in a real environment is one part of the challenge. The second part of the challenge is to prove that nanosensor can have value. Because nanosensor are new technology, they are expensive. Even when I'm saying I'm doing low-cost sensor, because it's a new technology, there are costs involved in R&D that makes them more expensive, at least at the start. So you have to prove that the value that nanosensor bring is not replaceable, that solution on the market. That brought me from the field of civil engineering to the field of chemical monitoring, because in civil engineering, a lot of needs are met by existing sensor solution. And I realized that my work would have more value in the chemical engineering field because a lot of needs are remaining unmet, specifically in water quality monitoring and air quality monitoring. But that's something I didn't know. I had to learn over the years what would be useful for the community and what would not be useful. So going back to your initial question, Hamida, nanosensor and sustainable development, one thing that's new for the last 5 years about is AI. I mean, AI has been existing for 40 years probably, but recently it's taken a lot of space. And this is something that everyone is saying will contribute to sustainable development. But when you're in the field of sensor and in AI, you realize that AI and big data, so models that are built on data, are built on data that is extremely reduced. You have some temperature sensor that works, you have strength sensor that works at big data level, you have computer vision that works at AI level, but a lot of data that would be useful to AI is not available. And when people are doing marketing with AI and for AI and say they are going to change the world with AI, as a specialist, I know they need more data. And I think we can bring this data with sensor if we work on sensor development. There's a long way to bring the sensor that AI need to meet what they say they will do. And I want to help doing that.
Yeah, I agree with you. AI is no performance without good data from good sensors. So thanks for sharing all of this knowledge. So my question, Bérengère, so you have been involved in numerous collaborative research projects and international collaborations. Can you share some highlights from these experiences and how they have shaped your work?
So as you may know, sensor research is very pluridisciplinary. In my field, I have to know about nanosciences, very advanced physics and chemistry of nanomaterials. And on the other hand, I have to do AI based on the data of my sensor. And my sensor, to provide enough data, I have to integrate them with electronics that lasts for a long time. So I have to bridge a lot of disciplines in research and technology. To do that, it's very hard to do that within a single team. You have to share and work with other teams that brings expertise in this and that field to really span all the scales from nano to actual deployment in real life. And in practice, if you don't have support funding, you cannot do that. The research doesn't work like that. To make this work possible, you need funding, which is really fostered by a collaborative research scheme. So particularly, I've been working a lot with European funding, first the H2020 scheme and then the Horizon Europe scheme, because it's very aligned with what I want to do. It's collaborative, it's pushing for exploitation work that has a exploitation trajectory. So it's really aligned. And also sensor research sensor development is expensive. It's a fact. And European schemes are large enough that we can fund realistically sensor development in a way where we can actually progress and we don't have to limit what we are doing. We can already do a good job because of this kind of funding.
So indeed, intersectional skills and collaboration across people and countries is the way to go, because we see that doing sensors means that we need different knowledge from different areas, from chemists to the end users, by the way of doing electronics systems, biology, and AI. So could you elaborate on the major collaborative research projects you have led, such as the Proteus project and the SenseCity project? So my question here, what are some of the key findings or challenges encountered?
So SenseCity project is actually an excellence equipment project. So in France, about a bit less than 15 years back, there was this huge scheme for large-scale equipment right at the time I was finishing my thesis. And my PhD supervisor, which was also head of my lab at the time, decided we have to respond. And basically, I was lead in the effort in putting this project. And the idea was to build a major climatic chamber that would incorporate scale 1 mock-up of city. So you imagine you have a climate chamber, and in that chamber, you have small houses, you have some garden, you have streets. And the idea of that space would be that you would use it to test sensor for urban application. Why is that important? Because what people were starting to realize at that time is that when you develop a sensor in the lab, it's working in your lab, but when you put it in the street, it doesn't work. And that's what they were realizing. But the problem is that if you want to test a sensor in a city, you have to negotiate with the city council. You have to put your worker in the street, and it's dangerous because you have car passing by. So it's very complicated. So the idea was to provide a space for researchers and companies to test their solutions in an environment that would be representative enough, but still controlled enough. And we got the funding. So it was a huge funding. It's 9 million euros. So it's a huge funding for France. And this was a funding for 10 years. I coordinated the project for 6 years. That was my first project right after PhD. And now SenseCity platform is running. And that's exactly what I just explained. It tests innovation in a real life condition. I'm not leading the platform anymore since 2016, but I'm using it. And actually I use it with you, Hamida, in the Cardiff project about air quality sensors. I also use the platform in the Proteus project. So same again, Proteus project. I was thrown at the deep end of a pool, to use American expression. Actually, Proteus was the first project, European project I was seriously involved in. And basically I never had a European project before, even as a partner. And I ended up writing the proposal and I got designated as coordinator on the project. And I was coordinator of my first European project. And that was on water quality monitoring. And the idea was to use Nanosensor, carbon nanotube for water quality monitoring. And that was amazing project because the team was awesome. Since then, I've done more European projects, and sometimes you have luck and sometimes more complicated. And this project, the team was amazing. Everyone was super motivated. It was a small scale European project, so you have all partners that were super involved in technology. So we would just travel to rest of Europe to brainstorm on, okay, how are we going to do that? What's the scheme? What's going to be the duty cycles on the sensor? How is it going to work? And in the end of the project, the sensor that started TRL 2 or 3, my sensors, they ended up TRL 5. So we tested in SenseCity for several weeks with super impressive results. And this project had several follow-up projects and is the project that's now leading to the next startup, Hydroscope, which is coming up.
So great, Bérengère. Thank you for sharing all of this experience in research field. So from this research field, let's move to the teaching and student concerns. I know that you are not lecturer, but I know that you give some teachings. That what topic do you cover in your courses on sensors and nanotechnology? How do you approach teaching this complex subject to students?
Okay, so first I need to say I'm not a professor or assistant professor. I don't have teaching requirements. So what I did throughout my career is I teach about one class a year, and I don't have to, so some year I don't teach. Usually the classes I teach are related to physics, and I usually teach small groups. So I try to have quite a personalized approach. A part of my teaching was trying to teach condensed matter physics with foreign students. So very different background in math and physics, and you have to teach them the concept that brings forward bank structures in semiconductors. And I can tell you, in France, students all have some mathematic backgrounds. As a French teacher, we may complain, but actually they have a good background, and foreigners have a very different background. So what I taught this class, I started with simplifying the class I had at École Polytechnique. And then I realized it didn't go through at all, so I simplified it a lot. And I also asked my colleague to add a module of the mathematics for physicists. And I think that's very important. Mathematics is a very useful tool to understand what we're doing in physics. So I think it's important that students in physics and sensor, they know a bit about math because it helps a lot. And I think what I said 10 years ago, people were saying, oh, okay, it doesn't matter. And now that AI is there, we need a lot of people in math because math is at the core of AI. So even if you love physics, people don't forget about math because it's going to help you out on that.
So, okay, thank you for this sharing. So, but I know that your expertise extends to research management and supervision of students. What strategies do you employ to effectively mentor and guide the next generation of researchers?
Okay, so it's a question that you can take several angles for. So one thing, so your question is related to project. Some projects can be done with PhD students and some cannot. And that's important to know. And some project I didn't hire PhD student because it was too applicative and it would have been hard to publish. And you have to publish to be a PhD student. So this is a decision that you have to take in the project to make decision. It's always a challenge to balance the need of projects with the need of PhD students when you have PhD students involved in collaborative research, because a PhD should have some freedom to investigate a specific topic. And even if it doesn't have direct application, a PhD student should be able to explore. While on the other hand, in collaborative projects, you are expected to give a result that goes that direction, and you don't have a choice. You have to give a result at a given date. So this is a bit of juggling between project constraint and PhD constraint. We try and make it work. It's not always easy. What I do is so something that's not majority case and that people don't do in European other countries is usually I take care of a deliverable for my students so that they can focus on research. So I allow them to do something that would not be their priority work, but in exchange, I'm doing the paperwork that they don't have to do. And in other countries, students have to do a lot of the paperwork, write the deliverable. And this I don't do to my students because I think it's not making them progress in the actual research. This is a debate. This is an ongoing debate. Last part of your question, I try to push interdisciplinarity to my students. I try to help them understand several topics because I think it makes them stronger in their career.
Okay, I agree with you, Bérengère. So interdisciplinarity is very important. So from that, let's move to the society. So in your opinion, what are some of the most promising applications of nanosensors in today's society? How do you see them impacting various industries?
Okay, so I started using nanosciences in the field of civil engineering, and I came to realize there might be use of nanosensors, but there's already a lot of things to do with existing sensor technology. So I moved to the field of chemical sensing a couple of years back, and I think this field is extremely promising because a lot of the needs in terms of chemical sensing are not met. For instance, in France, these days there's a big debate on PFAS, eternal pollutants, and actually sensing eternal pollutants is extremely challenging right now. So in the case of this challenge, what you have to do is you have to sample water at different locations and you send it to a lab and it has to be analyzed. So it's a very painstaking approach to do a diagnosis of risk for people of PFAS. If there were affordable sensor for this goal, it could be distributed throughout France to know what's the actual situation, and it would make things easier to mitigate the risk because people would know exactly where it is. So this is an example. There's also a lot of examples about drugs in the water, antibiotics, contamination of the water, and the limitation to that is measurement. So the need in terms of sensor for chemical monitoring in water, but also in air, infinite. And that's exactly where nanosensor can play, because with the tunability of nanomaterials, you can really tackle progressively each of these needs. This is a saying I always say to my students, we're not in a Stargate episode. Like in a Stargate, I don't know if any of you watch Stargate, but in Stargate, it's a sci-fi TV show. In every 45 minutes episode, the scientist in the story, she solves major physics question and she's getting a Nobel Prize every 45 minutes. This is wrong. Research is also painstaking, and things that you think are going to take a couple of days take several months. So I believe nanosensors, the one I develop, the one you develop, Hamida, because you work in similar field, they can really contribute to reducing chemical pollutions. But it's a hard work. Even if the literature says it's possible, it's still a hard work all around. One other thing I want to add there is that sensors are sensing. They are not acting. So there's a lot of job to be done into using the sensor data for improving then the situation. And this improvement, that works through public policies, but also you can act locally, you have actuators. And so my job also involves thinking about the solution that you put in place once you have measured you have a problem. So that's a part of the story. Last part of the story, next step after chemical sensing, and also progressively getting involved into biological sensing, because it's also a part of the story. And the needs are even more challenging than chemical sensing. For instance, we all are aware of COVID, and you would have wanted to be able to detect COVID in a room. And it was not possible a couple of years back, and it's still not possible. So for instance, in the HS4U project that I'm taking part of these days, we are developing a COVID sensor that is real-time COVID sensor. And it's a big challenge. It's a super big challenge. And I think there are a lot of initiatives going in this direction across the world, and they will be very useful in the future. Irrespective of COVID, there are a lot of challenges regarding to detection of virus and bacteria to protect people.
So my next question also is, could you share insight into your involvement in industrial contracts and collaboration and how they drive innovation in sensor technologies?
So I started my career trying to work with big groups, and it never went forward. I tried to push my solution to big groups, and this is not the right forum for this kind of solution. And then through European project, I met a lot of SMEs, because a lot of SMEs are involved in this H2020 scheme and now Horizon Europe scheme. And I found industries that are extremely forward-thinking, that are very flexible, open to new ideas and capable to implement them. Of course, they have to be careful. SMEs have to be careful not to go to any direction, but they are much more flexible and capable to get new ideas running. And I found this very positive. So to answer directly your question, my major involvement with industry came through the European project, because to get most of the European projects, you need to have SMEs involved in the project. And that's how I met a lot of SMEs. And up to these days, my most fun industrial experience are with SMEs, and I love the people I meet there and how these companies are working. The startup came a bit later. The startup, I mentioned at the startup, there's no in France at least, there's no alternative. But startup, if you want to push extremely innovative concept, you have to go through startup. That's the only way to get financing. SMEs can take up innovation, but within their core business. They cannot afford to go to a completely new business. They have to stay in the same business, and they can do innovation, but not major new products. So for new products, you have to go through startups. So I was involved. At the time, it was the start of the Business Nation. We have a scheme in France. We are getting settled, and we created Alta Road with Ceci and Ria. And this way, I also discovered the startup scheme and how it's working. To be fair, it's good, Hamida.
Your extensive experience includes leadership role in research team and networks. We see that from all of that you share with us today. How does effective management of these networks facilitate progress in sensor development?
So this is a slightly different topic. My research networks are needed to push your ideas across field and to get traction for your idea. I would not say it's my core business. I do that a little, but it's not my core business. I support it, bring people together, try and help them communicate. But still, I prefer direct involvement into project and pushing project forward than actual scientific networking, to be fair.
So right now, we are moving to the end of this podcast. So let me ask you some question extra about your research. So I know that as an IEEE Sensor Council volunteer, what role do you play in fostering industrial relations? And what initiative are you currently involved in or you will be involved in?
Okay, so I'm involved in the publicity committee, and the idea, so I mentioned my experience with a lot of companies, especially SMEs and startups. And the idea is to bring to the council the point of views of SMEs and startups, what this kind of public, this kind of community would expect from the Sensor Council and what would be helpful to them. So, for instance, what kind of message would they be sensitive to? So, to be fair, again, I'm starting as a volunteer of the council. So, at the same time, I'm learning about how the council is working. So, there's a lot of preliminary work to be efficient. So, I'm finding my groove there. But I think I can help on that front, like bridging the research and the industry community in the field of sensor, because I've been doing that for about 15 years now.
Lastly, how do you envision the future of sensor technologies and their role in addressing emerging societal challenges?
So I think my career has been to make sure that sensor can contribute to sustainable development, and I rest my case. I think that's what sensor can be helpful for. Just to be concrete, because what I say is just very abstract here. To be concrete, sustainable development requires that we measure what we are doing. Example, when you drive your car, you will improve your oil consumption. If you have a number and you see on your dashboard that you're using 7 liters per 100 kilometers, oh, I'm driving badly, I need to reduce, and you improve and it goes down to 6.5. And that's the same across the world. So if you can measure that you're polluting the air, you can reduce the pollution. And I think sensor can help clean up the world, reduce pollution, because they allow to measure. So if the sensors are available, you cannot ignore that you're polluting. You have to do something against pollution. In the end, I think it contributes to people's health. I didn't mention it much, but right now the startup Hydroscope that's developing sensor for water, it's an Indian company. And actually, they are developing sensors not for the European market, but for the Indian market. Because here, the status of water is critical. A lot of people, 30% of the people don't have running water. They don't have all running water. It's a major health issue with actual death. We're not talking just about people being sick. We have children dying out of poor water quality. And I really think that the sensor solution we're developing can help everyone, even in developing countries. Not only in rich countries, it can go to developing countries and help them have better living conditions. I don't want to dramatize the situation, but we should help wherever we can. And I think this contributes. And reducing pollution in that context, it helps the people, it helps the environment, and helps biodiversity. So it's beneficial all around.
So then, for the end, let's speak about our student and our audience. So what advice would you give to students or professionals aspiring to work in the field of sensors and nanotechnology based in your own experiences and expertise?
So I would say you need to pay attention to what your solution will be used for and think about links. So even if you're a chemist, a researcher in chemistry, of course, your main job might be to do synthesis of materials, but it's very important to build up your knowledge about how the solution is going to be used and get pluridisciplinary skill. For instance, right now I have a student, a chemist, and he's learning to do Python code to analyze the data from his sensor, and it's completely out of his main background, but he's learning because he is convinced, like I am, that he needs to learn that to be able to really use the sensor. So what I'm trying to say is that it's really, you should not stay focused in just one lane. If you want to do sensor, I think you need to learn pluridisciplinary skill. And if you don't like that, it might not be the same good direction. But if you like that, there's not many of us in the field that are really pluridisciplinary. So you would have a big boost in your career if you can become interdisciplinary. So you would be most welcome in our lab and in our companies.
So again, many thanks, Bérengère, for sharing with us all your experience and all of these advices. So see you soon, and thank you for listening to our podcast. Thank you, Bérengère. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamida. Thank you for all the good talk, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
So thank you for being here on this podcast. We look forward to seeing you soon. All my best.